Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Stephanie Cardenas, Community Engagement Specialist for the Durham region at Metrolinx. It is my pleasure to be the moderator for this evening's event. On behalf of Metrolinx, I'd like to welcome everyone viewing online to this evening's live event as part of the 4th Public Information Center for the Durham-Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit project. Metrolinx is proposing a more frequent and reliable transit service for Durham region and the City of Toronto through the Durham-Scarborough BRT project. To get there, a transit project assessment process, or TPAP, will need to be completed. The TPAP is a focused impact assessment created specifically for transit projects, regulated under Ontario's Environmental Assessment Act. The process involves a pre-planning phase followed by a regulated timeline of up to 120 days and includes consultation, assessment of impacts, development of measures to mitigate negative impacts, and documentation. The TPAP for the Durham-Scarborough BRT project commenced October the 14th, 2021. Public Information Center number 4 will be open on Metrolinx Engage until November 11th, 2021. We encourage you to review and share your feedback on the PIC4 materials and most recent preliminary design plans for each municipality. We also encourage you to use our interactive map. I want to thank you again for your interest in joining us here this evening. Please note that this event is being closed captioned. To use this feature, please enable it on your video player. Metrolinx acknowledges that it operates on the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. In particular, these lands are covered by 20 treaties, and we have a responsibility to recognize and value the rights of Indigenous nations and peoples and conduct business in a manner that is built on the foundation of trust, respect, and collaboration. Metrolinx is committed to building meaningful relationships with Indigenous peoples and to working towards meaningful reconciliation with the original caretakers of this land. Metrolinx remains committed to engaging with Indigenous people and nations on the Durham-Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit project. I would also like to take a moment to talk about safety. Safety is central to everything we do, whether it's our colleagues, customers, or community at Metrolinx. We're committed to putting safety first in everything we do. I'd like to begin with a safety moment. October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, or CSAM, in Canada. This campaign helps Canadians stay secure online by teaching them simple steps to protect themselves and their devices. Visit www.getcybersafe.gc.ca to learn how to stay safe online. Before we begin, I would like now to talk about the format and expectations for this virtual event. We will begin with a brief overview of the project. After the presentation concludes, we will be taking written questions submitted via our comment form on Metrolinx Engage. From there, my colleague Jocelyn Stenner will be taking the lead in moderating the Zoom room, where participants will have the opportunity to ask their questions live directly to our panel. We have scheduled this session to last an hour and a half. Our goal is to take as many questions as possible. As we often see a lot of similar themes in the written questions submitted, I'd ask that you scroll through the existing questions and see if the one covers your areas of interest. Please vote it up. This will allow us to answer as many different types of questions as possible. We will be answering questions based on popularity of votes. A reminder that you can submit a new question at any time during the presentation. For questions we are unable to get to during the event, we will be posting answers on Metrolinx Engage. We ask that you please be mindful that conduct inconsistent with our policies will result in the removal of your comments and questions. We encourage all attendees to be respectful and keep the conversation relevant to the Durham-Scarborough BRT project. Again, if you've just joined us, our event is being closed captioned. To use this feature, simply enable it on your video player. Metrolinx is committed to continuing the conversation about the Durham-Scarborough BRT, and we look forward to continued engagement with your community throughout the next stages of this important project. I would now like to introduce our wonderful panel for this evening. Stephen Linton, Community Engagement Senior Manager at Metrolinx. Kristen Damasi, Project Manager on the DSBRT for Metrolinx. Utan Samuel, Environmental Project Manager with Metrolinx. And David Hopper, our Consultant Lead with Parsons IBI Group. With that, I'll pass it to Stephen Linton.
Thanks, Stephanie, and good evening all. My name is Stephen Linton, Senior Manager for Community Engagement with Durham Region Team with Metrolinx. We thank you for joining us this evening and welcome you to the Durham-Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit Public Information Centre number 4. We are thrilled to be collaborating with Durham Region Transit, City of Toronto and the Toronto Transit Commission on a proposed plan and design to bring rapid transit to this corridor. Our team is committed to meaningful engagement, and in this stage of the project, we know there are many questions and concerns. If you feel your questions have not been addressed by the end of this live event, please contact us via the metrolinxengage.com website or by email at dsbrt@metrolinx.com. We value the communities we work with and want to ensure you we are working towards a better transit system for Durham and Scarborough. And with that, let me turn the presentation over to David Hopper, Consultant Lead at Parsons IBI Group.
Great, thank you, Stephen. And I will jump into the presentation in a moment here. I'm just going to turn my, good evening and welcome everybody. I'm going to turn my camera off here because I find it a little distracting at my end, and you may as well. And I also need to move the slide presentation over to my larger monitor to be able to see what's happening. So we'll get started right away. If we could move to the next slide, please. So the study area for this project extends for 36 kilometers from downtown Oshawa through the western part of the city of Oshawa, through Whitby, Ajax and Pickering, crossing into Toronto and then transitioning up from Highway 2 along Ellesmere Road as far west almost as McCowan, where we will interface with the planned extension of the Scarborough subway. So the 36 kilometers will have about 49 stops along the route, spaced to provide good service along the entire corridor. You'll note as well that the GO train service is also there, shown in the green line closer to the lake. It actually serves quite a different travel market. The GO train users tend to be focused on travel into downtown Toronto, and you'll also note that the GO train really does not serve the Scarborough Centre area or downtown Oshawa particularly well. So what we find is that this service is being proposed to be operated by Durham Region Transit to run in parallel with and augment the network of routes and services that are provided for the residents of the East End of Toronto and for Central Durham Region. Could I have the next slide, please? So as I mentioned, it is a 36-kilometer route through 5 municipalities. It will build on the TTC service along Ellesmere as well as the Durham Pulse 900 route, which is the heaviest used route in Durham Region Transit, carrying more than 3 million passengers last year, or the year before. It currently terminates its western limit at the University of Toronto Scarborough campus. The intention is to extend that route to Scarborough Centre, into the subway station, and to allow Durham to pick up passengers along the corridor. So people who live in the Toronto segment or who are traveling in the Toronto segment will be able to use either vehicle to move along the corridor in the dedicated lanes. As well, the dedicated infrastructure is being proposed to improve the speed and reliability of the service, primarily the reliability. We know that every transit trip is at least twice as long as the average car trip. So providing this kind of reliability, providing higher quality stations, as we see here, will encourage more people over time to take public transit as the region continues to grow. The next slide, please. So BRT is more than just buses and more than just lanes. It's a combination of a whole series of things. So as I mentioned, dedicated lanes are good for shortening travel times, as well as improving the reliability of the service. Anyone who's waited for the bus knows if the longer you need to wait for the bus on the occasional time, you start to plan for that every day. And what we're hoping is that you will not need a timetable to know when to go out for the bus. They'll be there every 5 minutes or more frequently during the peak periods. You go to the nearest stop and get on the bus without having to think about it. It also includes smart traffic signals that will be installed and will speak to the buses so they can be held as green to allow the buses to move more slowly and get back on schedule. What we also find with these smart signals is it actually makes for smoother traffic flow for everyone using the road. The service will also provide better connections along the corridor. The dedicated lanes in the city of Toronto will provide common stops for TTC as well as DRT and the occasional GO bus. But we've also planned stops for all of the perpendicular bus routes so that people who need to travel north or south off of the corridor at the beginning or the end of their trip or both will be able to do so quite conveniently. And as I mentioned, the reliability of the service comes from separating it from the general traffic. We see several other benefits of that, including enhanced safety, reduction in left turn accidents, and other benefits along the corridor, which we'll discuss a little bit later. Got the next slide, please. So the transit project assessment process is a class environmental assessment in Ontario. It is a very specific process that's been adopted for public transit. It involves a pre-planning phase, which, as many of you know, we've had underway for the last 2 years. When we get to the end of that pre-planning phase, we complete the draft documentation, and then we start the notice of commencement, and then for up to 120 days, we consult with the municipal, provincial, and federal stakeholders in the project. At the end of that, we'll have a complete environmental assessment project report that is then released for a 30-day public review, followed by a 35-day ministerial review. At the end of that, the minister has 3 options: to either approve the project as it is, to provide information back and require the team to do some additional work before approving the project, or not do anything, and at the end of the 35-day period, the project is deemed approved. This comes from historic projects that got stuck in the minister's office, and the municipalities and Metrolinx wanted to make sure that reports would move forward smoothly. Now, this is neither the beginning nor the end of the process. You can see from the chart here, we've been planning along this corridor since 2008. There was the introduction of the Pulse in 2013. There was an initial business case completed in 2018, and then this study started. At the end of this, the environmental assessment will give us certainty of the route and the infrastructure, which will allow us to move into the business case, the preliminary design business case, as well as seeking funding from senior levels of government in order to implement the project. There'll be a period of detailed design after this as well, followed by procurement and then delivery, and then, of course, a long service life for this infrastructure. Have the next slide, please. The TPAP is also somewhat focused. So the idea of the pre-planning period is to address the local issues and the local planning issues. And TPAP focuses on matters of provincial importance. So there is a limited number of things that the process is intended to address. It touches on Indigenous relations, primarily protected Aboriginal or treaty rights and particular areas of concern to our Indigenous nations. It talks to the natural heritage and looking at parks and conservation, looking at species at risk and species of concern, looking at wetlands and woodlands and habitat along the corridor, looking at areas of natural or scientific interest, as well as watercourses. From a hydrology perspective, it also looks at surface water and groundwater, as these are important to the health of the community in terms of providing drinking water. And we also look at areas of suspected or known historic contamination. And during the course of implementing the project, where we hit those areas, we are obligated to clean them up in order to improve the quality of the environment. Another area of provincial importance is heritage and archaeology. So we have done an extensive review to look at heritage properties and heritage structures along the corridor. We're looking for all of the built heritage resources, as well as cultural heritage landscapes, such as Pickering Village, which is a historic village area along Highway 2, which was one of the original highways in Ontario. So we'll also be looking for archaeological resources and areas of concern, as we'll touch on, particularly around cemeteries and other areas of known archaeological potential. Have the next slide, please. As I mentioned off the top, we're planning 49 stops. They're about 730 meters apart. That's typical for BRT. It's a little bit wider than the spacing on a typical bus route, but that allows us to have good quality service in terms of average speed, but also in terms of providing coverage. The stops are a little bit closer to each other, particularly at the west end, close to Scarborough Centre, and in the urban areas, the central area of Pickering and Whitby and Oshawa. Then they're a little bit further apart in areas like the Rouge River Valley or the Highway 412 area, where there really is no origin or destination for people. Go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to quickly run over the preliminary design in each of the areas. So in Toronto, there are 6 different zones, starting at the west end, just where we come out of Scarborough Town Centre. The Scarborough subway is looking at the actual final connection and providing the number of bus bays in the bus loop with the subway station for this project. So our work actually begins with the first physical infrastructure that is out on Ellesmere Avenue, starting at Grangeway, 1 block east of McCowan. The intention from Grangeway all the way out to Morningside, just at the west side of the University of Toronto, is to widen the road from 4 lanes to 6 lanes so that we maintain the 4 current travel lanes for cars and add 2 lanes for BRT. That will allow existing traffic to travel as well as providing increased capacity for transit. In Zone 2, in front of the university, the design is coordinated with the Eglinton East LRT as well as with the university's master plan. So the buses will transition out of dedicated lanes to the curbside to match the stops for the Eglinton and the university. Just beyond a realigned military trail, we get into Zone 3, and the intention in Zone 3 from the east side of the campus as far as Meadowvale is to maintain the existing 4-lane roadway, but convert it to 1 lane in each direction for general traffic and 1 lane in each direction for transit. In Zone 4, between Meadowvale and the far end of Ellesmere Road at Kingston Road, today, that is a 2-lane roadway, 2 very wide lanes. The intention is to widen it marginally and convert it to a 4-lane road with 1 lane of traffic in each direction and 1 lane of transit in each direction. In Zone 5 is an area where we have an interface with the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario because of the accesses on and off Highway 401. We're still finalizing that design, but the general agreement is to maintain 4 lanes of traffic for general use and 1 lane of transit in each direction. When we get as far as Raspberry Road, which is the last road before we get to the Rouge River, again, the buses will transition out into mixed traffic as far as the first street in Pickering. The reason we're doing this is this is a bridge over the the Urban National Park. It's a very large and complex and expensive structure to modify if we wanted to add lanes. As well, there's no driveways or side streets out there, and there's no capacity issues there. So we believe we'll be able to operate in mixed traffic in that section because of its particular configuration. Go to the next slide, please. Moving into the city of Pickering, the intention is to actually widen the road from 4 lanes to 6 lanes everywhere that has not already been widened throughout the entire width of the town. In some areas, there are curbside bus lanes that have been implemented over the last 3 or 4 years. The intention will be that as the median BRT is implemented, those curbside lanes will be transitioned to median lanes, such that there will be a continuous center BRT across the city of Pickering. The next slide, please. Within the town of Ajax, we have 3 separate segments, starting at the west end between Notion Road and Elizabeth Street in zone number 1. The intention here is to maintain the existing number of lanes, to add the transit into the median. When we get to zone 2, we're into the historic Pickering Village, which begins at Elizabeth Street as far as Rotherglen Road. The intention here is to widen the road, but actually create what we call an asymmetrical road. So we're looking at a 5-lane cross-section. We would have 1 general lane of traffic westbound, 2 BRT lanes in the middle of the road, and 2 eastbound traffic lanes on the south side. The reason we're doing that is to balance the need for general traffic, the need to preserve the culture and the heritage of Pickering Village, and to provide the transit facility. What we found in the traffic analysis is that the westbound traffic in the morning can be handled in a single lane of traffic, but the eastbound traffic in the afternoon requires 2 lanes of travel. So we've adopted the 5-lane in order to balance those 3 priorities. East of Rotherglen Road and as far as Lake Ridge Road at the east limit of Ajax, the intention is to widen from 4 lanes to 6 lanes to insert the 2 BRT lanes in the middle and maintain the existing capacity for cars and trucks. Go to the next slide, please. The next zone is in the town of Whitby. Whitby is a little bit different in that the heritage historic downtown of Whitby is quite narrow to the street, particularly right at Brock Street. So what we see from moving from from west to east is we start in zone 1A, where the intention is to widen the 4-lane road to 6 lanes, again with the buses in the middle. In zone 1B will be similar to Pickering Village, where we'll have 1 westbound lane and 2 eastbound lanes, as well as the BRT. In zone 2 and in zone 4, we'll convert the existing 4-lane roadway to 1 lane in each direction, plus 1 BRT lane in each direction. And then in zone 5, once we get east of Garden Street out to the Oshawa border, the intention is to widen from 4 lanes to 6 lanes by inserting the buses in the middle. Now you noticed I skipped over zone 3, so let's go back and have a look there. In the short block between Brock Street and Byron Street, the intention is to implement a 3-lane cross-section where we would have 1 eastbound traffic lane, 1 eastbound BRT lane, and 1 shared westbound lane for both buses and cars. This is to balance off the need for business access, the need to continue to move cars and trucks through downtown without diverting into local neighborhoods, as well as providing the highest degree of transit priority as we can. So the intention there is to balance the use of the road with the use of the space adjacent to the road and maintain the community without causing a lot of local traffic infiltration. There are still a few things to sort out there, but generally that will be the solution. Could I have the next slide, please? At the easternmost end in Oshawa, there are 3 segments, starting at the Whitby boundary as far east as around Waverly Street, where King Street and Bond Street split into a 1-way pair. We will be widening from 4 lanes to 6 lanes and inserting bus lanes in the middle. Once we get as far east as Waverly, we'll be inserting a new traffic light, both to allow for westbound left turns to get down into the community behind Trent University, but also to get the buses through that intersection where they will then transition out to the curb. Through downtown Oshawa on the 1-way eastbound King Street, we will be having a dedicated curb BRT and 2 through lanes of traffic. When we get as far east as Simcoe Street, the BRT lanes will end, but the buses will continue in mixed traffic as far east as Ritson Road, where they will have a layover that's currently used by the Pulse 900 service. They'll come back westbound in mixed traffic as far as Simcoe Street. And when they get west of Simcoe Street, again, there will be a curbside BRT lane along the 1-way street of Bond Street all the way out until it connects back in at Waverly there and then rejoins zone 1. Go to the next slide, please. So a little more detail at the east end of the corridor. So the intention here is that the buses will go east on King Street and north on Ritson Road to the layover, which is on William Street, just south of the Costco, for those of you who know the area well. And then the buses will return westbound on Bond Street. This will be an interim condition. The intention is when the GO train line is extended further east and there is a new GO station at the south end of Ritson Road, that this service will be extended from Simcoe Street to the Ritson GO station, but that will be part of a future study. Can I have the next slide, please? As I mentioned at the west end, the dedicated facility that we're looking at will extend as far west as Grangeway Avenue. You can see the star in the map, which is the proposed bus terminal for the Scarborough subway. That project team is looking at the size of the bus terminal to suit all of the routes that will feed in there. And so they will be providing the bus bays for the BRT service, which will then operate in mixed traffic on Grangeway Avenue before joining the dedicated lanes eastbound and westbound in the middle of Ellesmere Road. Go to the next slide, please. As part of the TPAP study, we are required to do a series of environmental studies. They're intended to document the existing conditions so that we can understand what's happening. We then look at the project footprint and superimpose that over the existing conditions to look for any potential impacts, and then look at ways to mitigate or reduce those impacts, either through modifying the design or finding mitigation measures that we can use to reduce those impacts. All of these studies are nearly completed and will be included in the environmental project report that will be released in January 2022. They cover the full range of features. So we're looking at natural heritage. So we're looking at flora and fauna. We're doing a complete tree inventory. We're doing a noise and vibration and air quality assessment. We're looking at the impacts of climate change. We're looking at drainage and stormwater management. And as well on the social environment side, looking at a stage 1 archaeological assessment, cultural heritage resource assessment, as well as a socioeconomic and land use study, so that we have a complete picture of what's happening, as well as developing a complete set of mitigation measures. Can I have the next slide, please? What we have found on each of these studies is that this is a highly urbanized corridor, not surprising given where we are, and that what we're really finding is that other than a few localized spots, the typical mitigation measures that would come from a typical road widening construction project will address all of the environmental issues that we're finding. We're expecting that the impacts would be very similar to a road widening. In terms of the natural heritage and tree inventory, the mitigation will include looking for ways to protect existing trees where possible, working at certain times of the year to avoid migration patterns as well as bird breeding season. We will also be looking at opportunities to improve habitat along some of the water courses and in some of the open spaces adjacent to the corridor, as well as looking at removing invasive species and replanting with native species wherever possible. We also have a full vegetation replacement protocol that generally replaces every tree with 3 new trees, so that we will return to a tree canopy along the corridor. We have been looking at opportunities for landscaping, and we'll be working with the municipalities to look at where we can augment trees in the community as a result of the work on this study. The next slide, please. Cultural heritage and archaeology, we've been through a full assessment of all of the buildings. It's been done through a visual assessment, a review of all of the municipal and provincial and federal registers for heritage structures. We've done research on properties that appear to have heritage character. We've been working with advisory committees in each of the municipalities as well to understand what they know about some of these buildings. We're also working with the Indigenous nations as well as the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Cultural Industries to understand the history of the area and document all of that. We are finding a number of properties where there are heritage buildings that may be impacted. In that case, we are looking at mitigation measures that include things such as changing the design to shift a widening of the road to the other side of the street where possible, or potentially shifting buildings slightly further back so they maintain the same relationship to the curb, but are slightly moved further back. Of particular interest are cemetery investigations. By law in Ontario and in most of Canada, anytime you're within 10 meters of the known boundary of a cemetery, you're required to do a more intensive investigation. And that's because the historic boundary of a cemetery could be different from what is the current boundary. And we want to make sure that there are no human remains outside that will be disturbed by the project. In this project, as in every project, if we do find archaeological materials during our work will stop and the site will be protected until it can be reviewed by a licensed archaeologist, and the artifacts that are recovered will be fully documented and used to augment our knowledge of both post-contact as well as pre-contact work that's happened, things that have happened in the area. Could I have the next slide, please? We also know in our changing climate that we need to be very careful about stormwater and the management of bridges and structures along the corridor. There are 28 water courses or drainage crossings of the corridor. As well, there are also 4 railway and highway crossings. So there are a significant number of bridges and culverts that need to be addressed. We've assessed each one in terms of its existing carrying capacity, as well as plans that each municipality and the 2 conservation regions have for each of these watercourses. So we are looking to make sure that where we are modifying structures, they will be upgraded to meet the current hydraulic expectations. We are looking to strengthen some of the older structures, as well as increasing the resilience of our watercourses to deal with larger storm events. We're also, in reviewing these structures, coordinating with the local municipalities to make sure that plans they have to maintain some of their structures, particularly in Oshawa, Whitby, and Toronto, are coordinated such that the municipality doesn't do an improvement in the short term, only to find that when we come in 2 years later, we need to undo that improvement. So those are being coordinated. Could I have the next slide, please? In terms of air quality and climate change, we have done a full air quality model as well as a noise and climate change model. So we are looking at how we can be more resilient. We're looking also in terms of the construction of how we can mitigate impacts on air quality as we go through here. So we're looking at how we specify things like low emission construction equipment, or look for greener alternatives for both transit vehicles as well as construction vehicles. In the initial business case, we estimate this project will save 162 kilotons of carbon dioxide with the level of travel. So it's a fairly significant change in terms of working to improve the air quality along the corridor. We're also looking at opportunities to reduce greenhouse gases by encouraging more public transit, by providing a competitive service, as well as by planting trees, which have the ability not only to help offset pollution, but also to help us in storm events in terms of capturing and controlling stormwater. Okay, the next slide, please. As I mentioned, noise and vibration, the primary source of noise and vibration is either during the construction activity or with the traffic that runs along the highway. We've identified 40 potential sensitive receptors that we've used as test cases to understand noise along the corridor. So we are looking at the impacts. It's very typical to other road widening projects. The typical mitigation measures will be applied. So we'll be looking to use low vibration construction equipment wherever feasible. We'll be looking to restrict construction hours. And there are a number of limited locations where additional noise barriers need to be installed in order to protect outdoor living areas along the corridor. And those will be identified, are identified on the plans that are available at the Metrolinx Engage website. Can I have the next slide, please? The socioeconomic and land use study is looking at the growth along the corridor. There are several designated growth centers under the Places to Grow Act. So we have downtown Oshawa, downtown Whitby, downtown Pickering, and Scarborough Centre. The intention of this corridor is to join those together to encourage more travel along this corridor by public transit. We do know that with the mix of employment lands and retail lands and residential lands, that about 40% of the trips that are made along this corridor begin and end very close to the corridor, which is ideal for encouraging people to use public transit for more of their trips more frequently. We're also looking at where the growth is being planned by each of the municipalities to make sure the stops are being placed to be coincident with the higher order development and making sure that we can serve things appropriately. We do know that some businesses are more sensitive to disruptions like parking, so we are also looking at how we can limit that and control that. As part of moving forward with this, Metrolinx is also committed to establishing community liaison committees with local residents and business associations and other stakeholders to address very localized issues, not only to help understand what the project will look like in its detailed design phase, but also how we can support business and support the neighbors while we construct the project. We do know that road construction can be disruptive, so we need to work together to create the right expectations of the community, as well as manage any local closures of side streets or driveways so that there's no surprises. You know what's going to happen and you'll be well informed. Have the next slide, please. Another factor that's coming in with most transit corridors now is improvements to the active transportation network. So the intention is to upgrade sidewalks and cycling facilities along the corridor. It's a combination of cycle tracks and multi-use pathways for the cycling facilities. There will be continuous sidewalks all the way along. However, in some of the more urbanized areas like downtown Whitby and Pickering Village, the cycling facility will move away from the corridor and run on a parallel street or route that has been designated by the local municipality as part of their cycling network, because there just simply isn't enough room to fit it all in. We're also looking to work with the municipality to provide more enhanced bike parking near the stops to encourage more cycle and ride, and also encourage more people to travel along the corridor by walking further or cycling further when the weather is good, and taking transit when the weather is not. So we find that active transportation and public transit work hand in hand in encouraging non-automobile travel. Go to the next slide, please. So building a 36-kilometer BRT is not something that will be done overnight. It's also not something that will be done all at the same time. So we have been working on an implementation strategy with all of our partners to look at how we can phase this in. The intention is to build this in segments that can be done in 1 or 2 construction years, so that there will not be long periods of construction in front of any one location. This is not the same as the construction on the Eglinton crosstown, because with BRT, we don't need to relocate the utilities or build all the track infrastructure in the middle of the road. So it will be more akin to a local road widening project. What we can see here in Durham region is divided into 3 stages. So Durham region has already received some federal funding to advance preliminary design, and will be using this environmental assessment to move forward for construction funding. The intention is to start at the west end, where traffic is heavier in the dark blue areas, through the west end of Whitby, parts of Ajax and Pickering. In stage 2, we'll complete the transition across Pickering, including converting the curb lanes to median lanes, finishing up more of the segments through Ajax. And then the third phase, which currently is an undetermined timing, but is likely sometime after 2025 or 26, we'll see the pinch point areas in Pickering Village and downtown Whitby, as well as the eastern end towards Oshawa, coming towards the end of the project. In the City of Toronto, the project is also currently not funded, and this EA is important both to allow for the acquisition of property and to seek funding from the federal senior levels of government. And we see the work in Toronto likely being divided into 3 stages. The intention would be to work at the west end first, where traffic is heaviest and there's the greatest benefit to transit, probably west of the university. In the second stage, we would look at the areas through the Highway 401 interchange along Kingston Road, as well as at the university, where we would tie into the Eglinton East LRT. And then the third stage would likely be the segment along Ellesmere from Military Trail to Ellesmere, knowing that that has the lowest traffic congestion today. But we do need to make sure that as the region continues to grow, we do have median lanes along the corridor to provide reliability across the entire corridor. Can I have the next slide, please? So in terms of construction and delivery, I've mentioned there are some lanes done in Pickering and Ajax. They were designed to be converted to central median lanes, so that work will happen relatively quickly. The construction will depend on funding, property acquisition, permits, and approvals. So we will be looking to phase things, starting with areas of greatest demand first, and also areas of the least complexity first, and then working through these in a fairly logical sequence. There is some funding available under the Canada Infrastructure Program that Durham Region is seeking, subject to federal approval. The balance of the project will then move forward both in Durham and in the City of Toronto, with Metrolinx as a partner to go to the senior levels of government to obtain the funding in order to implement this project. It is one of 3 priority BRT corridors that Metrolinx has identified in the Greater Toronto Area. The business case for it, the initial business case, is quite strong, and our initial work on the preliminary design business case is indicating a similarly strong business case, so that will be a positive sign moving forward to obtain funding. Okay, the next slide, please. So the next steps we talked about is the TPAP, so that was commenced a week ago. It will be online through these 3 PIC events, as well as online until the November the 11th. We will be taking all of the input that we get through these meetings and through input directly on the site and documenting that as part of the process and using it to refine it. The draft environmental project report is being circulated to the municipal, provincial, and federal agencies. And when we have their comments incorporated, it will be available for public review, which is planned for January and February. The notice of completion will be issued when that is ready, and then there'll be a 30-day public review period followed by the minister's review. The preliminary design business case is now getting underway now that we've finalized the design and are working on the cost estimates, and the intention is to release that early in 2022 as well. That'll be one of the two documents, the EA and the business case, that will be used to move forward with funding. To stay up to date with the project, you can email us at dsbrt@metrolinx.com or go to the metrolinxengage.com/dsbrt website. Those will stay active throughout the process, so we can continue to stay in touch. If you'd like to be added to our mailing list so that we can notify you when the notice of completion is issued, please do so, and we will be glad to add you to our mailing list. So I believe that concludes the formal presentation. So I'll turn it back to Stephanie to start the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. For those who have just joined us, thank you for participating in our Durham-Scarborough Bus Rapid Transit virtual open house as part of Public Information Center number 4. My name is Stephanie Cardenas, Community Engagement Specialist for the Durham region for Metrolinx. This event is being closed captioned to use. It's being closed captioned. To use this feature, enable it on your video player. Let me take a moment to reintroduce our panel this evening. Stephen Linton, Community Engagement Senior Manager at Metrolinx. Kristen Damasi, Project Manager, DSBRT at Metrolinx. Utan Samuel, Environmental Project Manager at Metrolinx. David Hopper, Consultant Lead at Parsons IBI Group. Our terrific panel is ready to take some of your written questions that have been submitted. Just going to get some of these questions. Will the new Scarborough Centre station being delivered as part of the TTC Line 2 extension incorporate adequate bus bays to accommodate the projected bus volumes as part of the Scarborough-Durham BRT project, or is a separate terminus station being considered for this project?
Thanks, Stephanie. No, that's a good question. We have been working with the Scarborough subway team. They will be providing a single bus terminal that is integrated with the subway station, and there will be spaces in that terminal to serve the BRT. They're also looking at how that will connect along Grangeway down to Ellesmere, along with how the other TTC routes in the area will serve the bus station there at the new subway station. So we have limited our project to work on Ellesmere east of Grangeway, and we agree that that would be the logical coordination limit between the two studies.
Great. The second question that we received: will the DSBRT be timely enough to affect the law of induced demand so that riders find the DSBRT more convenient as compared to driving?
Thanks, Stephanie. That's another great question. So as I mentioned off the top, we know that every transit trip is at least twice as long as an equivalent car trip, and sometimes 3 times longer. And if you have to actually come up to Highway 2 and go across and then change again, and you have multiple transfers, it can be even 3.5 or 4 times longer. So what we're trying to do with this, and we've proven this in other locations such as on Viva, is by introducing these BRT lanes that have a more reliable service, we can reduce the amount of time, improve the reliability along the corridor so that people spend less time planning for their trip and more time actually traveling if they have a a guaranteed travel time. They don't need to build that extra 5 or 10 minutes into their schedule in case the bus is late, and then have that time spent away from home that they don't need to. So we see a savings in terms of the travel time because of the service and because of the reliability of the service. What that will do, and our modeling is showing it, and it's happened elsewhere, is that will increase the number of people who choose public transit along the corridor. The other thing that will happen over time is we're trying to maintain the existing car capacity in the corridor. So we're maintaining 4 lanes in the western part of the Ellesmere corridor and out in Pickering. But as we see 200,000 more people and 66,000 more jobs, we're going to see more demand for travel and more traffic, and that's going to grow over time. And what will happen is as the roads get more congested, that will also convince more people to try transit and take transit more often. So the intention is more of a carrot and stick approach to encourage more transit usage over time.
Right. Thank you, David. Third question that we have, or a comment that came in, could the bus start from the King Town Line in Oshawa? The Bond and King Street are already being one way with more lanes.
So Stephanie, I'll take that one as well. That's a great question. We did have that discussion at the beginning of this study, is where is the eastern limit of both the physical infrastructure and where the bus runs. So the decision was taken that at this time we would stop at Simcoe Street in central Oshawa. That will be the next corridor that Durham is looking at is a north-south BRT service up to Durham College. DRT is also looking at where their routes operate, and so will consider going further east than Ritson, but today they believe that is the most logical place to turn around this service. And then, as I mentioned, when the GO train to Bowmanville is put in place, there'll be a new GO station at the bottom end of Ritson, and the intention is to take these dedicated BRT lanes down to that station. And then there's no reason why an additional service further east couldn't be put in place. So Durham Region Transit will be looking at this as part of their ongoing service planning.
Okay. Thank you. Someone wrote in and said, why this project and why are we not instead improving GO train service?
So again, that's a great question, and the answer is there are separate projects that are improving GO service. There's work that I'm working on another project to look at new GO stations for Smart Track and one at East Harbour. They're looking at a 4th mainline track along part of the eastern corridor. There's looking at the Bowmanville extension. We're also looking at the Shepherd LRT, the Eglinton East LRT, the BRT on Simcoe Street. There's plans in Durham Region for higher order transit lanes on Taunton Road. So the idea is this is a complete network, and we don't need one or the other of these projects. We need all of these projects to meet our objectives for 2041 as outlined in the regional plan. So there are separate teams working on the GO train. As I mentioned, the GO train serves a very different market than the BRT service along Highway 2 does. The GO train tends to focus on long distance commuters down into the financial hub in downtown Toronto, whereas this service is more local for people who live in Whitby and have a job in Pickering, or who live in Ajax and have a student going to Trent University, or things like, or have live in Pickering but have a job at the Aldgate Centre. So the intention is to augment the service in this corridor as well as expand the GO service.
Okay, great. We did get a question that came in and said, when would construction begin at Rougemont in particular?
So Rougemont is towards the west end of Pickering. I believe that is in a sort of a phase 1, phase 2 area. So I think we're going to see some construction in that area sometime between 2023 and 2025. Now, this is all subject to funding availability and the sequencing of work. If it turns out there's a very complicated issue that we weren't aware of in that area, that might mean another segment gets built first. But the Pickering area is intended to be done towards the beginning of the program. We're going to finish this EA early next year. There's another year or so of detailed design work before we get into construction. So we're not likely to see any construction before the summer of 23 and likely really 24 before it ramps up. So that Rougemount area should be in that first tranche somewhere 2024, 2026.
Okay, great. Thank you, David. The next question is, how will the BRT and proposed Eglinton East LRT interface?
So thank you. That's a great question. We are working with the plans for the Eglinton East LRT. So we know that it's coming up Morningside, and then it makes a right-hand turn and runs along the south side of Ellesmere and stops at the campus near the current bus loop, and then turns north on a modified military trail, looping around the campus before going further north on Morningside. We have their plans. That's why we're transitioning out of the BRT lanes as we cross through the intersection of Morningside, is to line up particularly the eastbound buses with the LRT platform. And then we go back into dedicated lanes east of Military Trail. And then the westbound will also be curbside to tie in to the university and college campus, as well as to the planned underpass of Ellesmere that the university is planning. So the university's master plan, the Eglinton East LRT and the BRT have been planned together to be an efficient way for all of those activities to happen in the same place.
Okay, great. Thank you. Why is a curbside BRT not a legitimate path?
So early on in the study, we set out a number of criteria for how we were going to evaluate the project. So we needed to look at things like travel time, travel reliability, road safety. We looked at community impact. We look at the economics of it, how expensive it is to build things. We looked at impacts on the environment. And what we've found in the curbside options, or options that we're operating in mixed traffic, really is that it's right-hand turns at all of the individual driveways and all of the streets. It's very hard to manage that interface. And so we can't reliably get transit operating along curb lanes. We know that happens today with buses. We know that when they operate in mixed traffic, we see a lot of weaving around the buses. And I know many of us who have been on the bus have been at an intersection where the cars are moving fine in the other lane and the bus is stopped because there are 6 cars making a right-hand turn at the light that's being held up by pedestrians that are crossing the street. So what we found is, in order to remove that friction and in order to make sure we get a good, reliable service every day, including days when the weather's bad or when there's an incident on a 401 and everyone's trying to use the rest of the road network to find somewhere else to go, being in our own lanes in the middle of the road that are dedicated to transit all the time provides a much better service, which will encourage more people to take transit. When we looked at the curbside option, we did not see the ridership improvements that we were expecting, which means we're going to end up with a lot more traffic congestion. So that's really the reason that curbside really does not function nearly as well.
Okay, perfect. There seems to be a lot of acrimony around the amount of public information. Could you comment on this?
Oh, maybe I could start, but then I'd like to pass it to some of the others on the team, because I seem to be doing a lot of the talking and I need a bit of a break here. I think we have had a healthy conversation. I mean, it has gotten a little bit heated, but I think those kinds of conversations are all because we're all trying to find the best solution for everything and everybody. So I think we've been trying to use the process to educate the public as to why we think this is a good thing to do, why it is a necessary thing in our region to try and improve transit. We have been listening to the concerns. There have been some significant changes to the design that have come out of the conversations. For instance, the segment from Military Trail to Meadowvale is not being widened. It's going to be converted and maintained as 4 lanes. We know there is some concern around medians and the change to traffic patterns with left turns. We're working to try and explain how that would function. So I think we have had some good conversations and there's more to come, but maybe I'll turn it over to Kristen to see what if she has something to add.
No, I mean, I would just add, that we've been working on this phase of the project for the last 2.5 years, and I think, we've tried really hard to accommodate everybody's feedback. We've met with a lot of different stakeholder groups, over the last 2 years. You have seen designs evolve and change over time, and I think we hope to continue the conversation as we move beyond the environmental assessment phase and into the detailed design.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe I can add to that, because the community consultation is really essential to our work. Through engagement, we have updated and improved the project to respond to some of the things we've heard. And this is our fourth public information centre. So there was a public information centre in June 2019, and we presented and discussed the overall objectives and principles of the project. Public information centre in later on, which then presented the first draft to gather community feedback. And then another one in November 2020 through January 2021. And here we presented the draft recommended design based on the feedback received earlier. And again, we're going through this phase, and as stated, through this process, we're looking for further input. Throughout the planning and preliminary design stages, we've also met with stake advisory groups, as Kristen mentioned, and we're excited to recently get back into the community in person, where we've done events such as community pop-ups and walkabouts. And we're looking to do more engagement along the proposed BRT route in Scarborough and Durham in the near future. And this will allow us to provide additional information about the project and to continue to hear from the community.
Okay, thank you. Another question we received is, why not extend the BRT beyond Oshawa?
So great, that's another good question. So I think that sort of relates to the previous one about going out to the town line. So I think Durham Region Transit is looking at where the ridership is, and so they are always looking at, I know they do have a route that goes a little bit further east. They're looking at how to improve that. I think they're also looking at the Bowmanville extension and whether that covers off some of that route. So I think Durham Region Transit is looking constantly for how to move more people in the region by transit. So that's something we will definitely pass along to them. As I mentioned right now, our study was limited in terms of the physical infrastructure ending at Simcoe Street in Oshawa in order to tie in with the north-south BRT. As well, I mean, 36 kilometers is already a very long project. So we have to sometimes stop this phase of the work and get this done, and then have another study to look at the next phase. So I think we can look at that later on. So we'll take that back to Durham Region Transit.
Okay. In light of some of the recent sessions involving the homeowners association, specifically Ellesmere or Highland Creek, the Highland Creek Association, are there plans to revise the project along Ellesmere?
So maybe I'll start on the technical side and then pass it over to Stephen. So we have been looking carefully. I think there's, I mean, the median that we're talking about here is the size of a current traffic island. I mean, it's the size of it's a standard curb height. So it really isn't the great divide that some people have characterized it to be. I think it's important, though, to recognize that road safety is a very, very important feature here. So if you have a car, if you imagine you're driving along the road and the cars are in the curb lane and the buses are in the lane beside it, and it's red asphalt and you're not supposed to be on the red asphalt, if you were allowed to turn left across there, do you then make a left-hand turn from the curb lane across both directions of bus travel and not see a bus coming up behind you on the left-hand side? Or do you move into the bus lane? And when is it safe to move into the bus lane? And if you stop there, the bus isn't expecting you to be there. It creates a lot of additional complexity along the roadway. And so we found on Viva and other jurisdictions that have put these in, that by what you would need to do instead of turning left into the driveway is go to the next traffic light, make a U-turn and come back. It adds a few seconds to your trip, but is much safer for everybody that's out there on the road. So I think we are committed to doing more of a safety review and talking to the community about it. But we feel it's very important to maintain the degree of priority because it's the reliability that comes from the buses having a predictable trip that encourages public transit, which will make the project successful. But I'll pass it over to Stephen to talk a little bit more about some of the processes moving forward.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, David. So again, from an engagement perspective, we continue to connect with key stakeholders in this area, including the residents, business owners, and elected officials. And we're, continuing to also connect them with the planning and design team. So all of the thoughts and comments we are hearing and have heard, through some of the in-person events and through the virtual open houses are taken into consideration as we continue to plan for this project. And again, we mentioned a couple of times the Metrolinx Engage website. So if there are changes based on what we're hearing, we'll update the website and communicate said changes there. I don't know, Kristen, if you had anything to add, but again, look out for us to continue to engage within this community.
Okay.
Only to say that there, we are making commitments to review certain aspects of the design as part of the environmental report. Just because we're not doing as part of this phase of work, they can be looked at in future phases as well.
Okay, thank you. This is in regards to the traffic study. When in 2020 was the Metrolinx traffic study done? Given that, it was, given that the height of COVID kept many people at home, will a second study be done now that people are reclaiming their lives and are back to driving?
That's a great question, and there's a bit of information floating around about that. So the study itself was done in 2020, but the information that was used as the basis for that comes from what is now commonly being called the before times. So all of the traffic information, all the counts that we've been using are all pre-pandemic. So we have in the Greater Toronto Area, there's a study that's done once every 5 years called the Transportation Tomorrow Survey. It's been done every 5 years since 1986. It's used as a great baseline for how travel and land use are changing in the Greater Toronto Area. That last survey was in 2016. That's the oldest of the data. Most of the municipalities do traffic counts on the roads once every 3 years. So we have data from 2016, 17, 18, and 19. So that is the data that has gone into the base of the transportation model. The model that we're using is for the entire Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. It's very well calibrated. It is used in all of the studies for highways, local roads, transit projects. So it's a very robust and well understood model. So we have calibrated that against the information we have from the before times, and then use that to project out with the increased population and employment out to 2041. So we believe that that study is very robust. It is the way that all of these studies are done. And so we don't believe there's a need to go out and do more traffic information at this point. Our Metrolinx is also looking at changes in behavior because of COVID. Some jurisdictions are seeing such a decrease in transit ridership that they're actually seeing more traffic now than they saw 2 years ago because everyone is choosing to drive. That fortunately isn't happening too much in the Greater Toronto Area. We are seeing some return to transit travel. Durham tells us they're back to about 50% of what they were before. So there are studies ongoing about the future of work. We do know that along this corridor, there are a lot of activities like manufacturing, higher education, healthcare, and retail and other service industries that have continued to require some people to be on site anyway, and more of that is going to happen earlier. So we will see an uptick in transit in this corridor. It's more resilient to change than, say, travel to the Toronto Dominion Centre downtown. So Metrolinx is continuing to look at that, but we think that the information we have is robust and is good for the planning for predicting what's going to happen for 2041.
Great. Thank you, David. I will now pass it over to Jocelyn, who will connect us with the participants ready to ask live audio questions. Jocelyn, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone who has joined us in the Zoom room this evening and for patiently waiting to ask your question to our wonderful panel. If you're viewing this evening's event and have an interest in asking your question live, you can still join us in the Zoom room by selecting the Join Zoom yellow button on the event page. If you're in the Zoom room and have not done so already, please use the raise hand function if you would like to be added to the speaker list. We will be taking questions in the order in which they were received. We know that participants have a lot of great questions and comments for the panel. And we just want to get into some of those really good questions. I just want to go over a couple more things before we do that. So for this process, we kindly ask that you keep to one question that's concise and is relevant to the DSBRT project to ensure as many people as possible have the opportunity to ask their question to the panel. For the questions, I'll introduce the next speaker. At that time, my colleague Oscar, who's in the Zoom room as well, will unmute you and you can proceed to ask the question. And then just one last reminder, if you are going to ask a live question, we just kindly ask that you're not viewing the presentation on a separate device or monitor, just because we get a little bit of feedback when that happens. So if you could pause that or just kind of close that other window when you do go live, that would be wonderful. And then lastly, we are continuing to refine our virtual engagement format based on your feedback. And we encourage you to complete the post-event survey that will be available for 1 week after this event. And that gets emailed to all those that registered. If you didn't register and you are still viewing the session and you'd like to have an opportunity to participate in that survey, you can always email us at the dsbrt@metrolinx.com email. And that's it from me. I'm going to get over to the live questions now. So the first speaker that we have is Councillor Crawford. So Councillor Crawford, go ahead with your question.
Thank you very much. And thank you once again for meeting with our residents. I think some of you know me, we've had numerous conversations. So I have two questions. So if I can't ask two questions, can I ask one and then put my hand up again later?
You can go ahead. So we actually have slightly less participants in the Zoom room than we typically see. So I think we do have a little bit of flexibility in time, more so than we usually do.
Okay. My first question I think should be fairly easy. Have you received funding yet for the Pickering Village piece of for Ajax? Did I freeze?
It actually looks like a David freeze.
Okay.
Maybe you could come on and speak to it a little later, but I know we have some funding within the Ajax area. David, you're back on.
Am I back?
Yes.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I was so anxious to happen, it must overwhelm the system. I believe the funding that is primarily in Pickering and the east end of Ajax and a little bit into Whitby. I don't believe the funding that they have currently received covers the Pickering Village portion.
Okay. And also, would you mind going over the timelines for specifically for Ajax from Westney through to I think it's Alexander? Would it go to Alexander Landing or does it go right out to Lake Ridge?
Goes right out to Lake Ridge. So if we could go in the presentation, can we go up to the slide that showed the about 3 slides earlier that shows, or sorry, the slide that shows the there we go. After active transportation is the map with the here we are. I'm just going to move it over to my other screen so I can actually see. It's a little bit small here for me. So I believe in Ajax, the first phase for Durham, which is going to start fairly early, design next year, construction between 22 and 25, is shown. I still can't see that. It's sort of east of Rotherglen and out towards Alexander Landing is the first bit. Then we do, or no, sorry, Harwood to Alexander Crossing is the first phase. In the second phase, which is 2024 to 2027, is Rotherglen to Harwood. And then the last phase is west of Rotherglen over to Notion and east of Alexander Crossing to Lake Ridge. That's the current thinking anyway.
Okay, so it kind of jumps around there then. So
yeah, we can't sort of do the whole town at once, and so we have to do a little bit of leapfrogging. So we've tried to see which sections we think are less problematic and are going to get us a better bang for our buck, and so that's the current thinking of how that will happen. Obviously, as we move into it, it might change slightly, but that's the current thinking.
okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to ask a question.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. So the next live question that we have was from Michelle. So Michelle, if you want to go ahead and ask your question, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay. I'm finding this Zoom very difficult to deal with. And I was wondering if you'll be continuing with just virtual, or will there be live meetings where people can attend, especially in light that the provincial government is now opening up more and more public venues.
Thanks for that, Michelle. So I have Stephen, did you want to start with that one?
Yeah, thanks, Jocelyn. Yes, so again, as mentioned earlier, things are starting to reopen. We are looking at getting out into the community, right across Scarborough and within Durham, and, trying to get into points where there's going to be impact, including some of the riders and residents. So, over the next few weeks, we are going to be doing all we can to get out into the community. It's actually helpful to hear some of this information. And as we mentioned earlier, we do have the DSBRT at metrolinx.com email. So if you can put any ideas or thoughts in terms of where some of these meetings could take place, we can definitely take a look and try and plan something for that community.
Thanks, Stephen. So the next participant that we have is Souza, who's going to ask the question live to the panel. Souza, go ahead.
Thank you for this opportunity again for Metrolinx people and everybody who joined here. I like to say again, I disagree with this project using using Ellesmere Road as part of this project. I'm totally against. Reason being, I live right on Ellesmere. It's quiet, it's a residential area. The buses that come by, the Pulse buses that pass by, doesn't matter what time of the day you look at them, they're always empty. So I do not see, I find this using part of Ellesmere for this purpose is totally useless according to me. Plus, right now, with 2 lanes right now, we having problem already on Ellesmere Road because the houses, they shake when one bus passes by. You can feel it, you can hear it. Like we have stuff sometimes that fall off. If you put something, sometimes they fall off. So now opening it's gonna make it even, like, how you guys gonna control that? Because right now with 2 lanes on Ellesmere, we're having trouble. So imagine all those buses passing by every 5 minutes. It's gonna make our life closer to our place. And closer to our place, it's gonna make our life like miserable. And they talk about security. I don't see the security there. Like right now, it's very secure. Doesn't matter what time of the day you go by, it's always quiet, beautiful, people walking by peacefully. So now you open up the traffic and you talking about security. It's not security, it's more insecurity, it's more disturbance. We don't have accidents around here. I bet you we're gonna have more. So
Suzette, sorry, I was just wondering, maybe there's quite a bit there. I wonder if we can pass it over to the panel to start digging into some of that, and maybe if you feel that there's a little bit more kind of clarity that you want on any of that, just so they can start getting into some of it.
Yeah, the question I have, what is the solution you would have for the houses that are shaking right now? With 2 lanes right now, we having problem. Every time you can feel the house trembling. So now with that, what is the solution for us now? Like if you were to proceed with this project?
Thanks, Suzette. Over to you, panel.
So that's a good question. So I can start with that one. So we have been doing noise and vibration assessment. We will go back and have a look at what's happening in your neighborhood. I didn't see anything in the results that I've seen that show unusual patterns, but we can always have a look and see and do more detailed work before we reconstruct in that area. If we do find there are issues, there are things that can be done by the type of road base that we use that can sometimes control the vibration. Sometimes it's also the challenge with buses in the curb lanes is they hit catch basins, and the catch basin acts like a drum, which actually causes some of the problems. When the buses are out in the middle lane, dedicated lanes, they wouldn't be doing that. So I think we can come in and have a look in a little more detail as we get into detailed design and see if there's something particular that's happening right at your house or right in your stretch of the road that's going to require some additional work. So there are solutions that we've used. We had similar problems in parts of Ottawa where they're on sensitive clays that behave the same way. So there are things we can do there. The other part of your question was asking is, the buses that are going by don't have anybody on them. What's the difference? So I want to spend just a minute on that. So today, the buses that are coming out from Scarborough Centre are busy, and you are right at the very end of the route, right? The 95, most of the buses stop either at the university or just before Kingston Road. So that's the very end of the route. So there's nowhere else to go further east on a TTC bus. So they're not going to be full because there's nobody going there. Similarly, the Durham buses that are coming the other way, when they cross over into the city of Toronto, they're only allowed to drop people off on the way in, and they can only pick people up on the way out. And they're really bringing right now primarily to the university. When that route goes all the way through to Scarborough Town Centre, and they're able to pick up and drop off, and we see more people east of the highway and east of the Rouge, we're going to see a substantial increase in ridership. We already see ridership growing in that corridor, and our modeling is showing we're going to see significant increases. And one of the highest increases in total ridership is in your neighborhood, because instead of being sort of the ends of 2 routes, it's going to be the through portion of the corridor.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Suzette. So there's a couple, there's no more hands up in the chat now, but there are a few questions from other participants that I was asked to read aloud. So I'm going to get through that. But Suzette, if you do have a follow-up question that you want to ask, having heard David's response, just send myself or Oscar a quick note. And then at the end, we can kind of jump back if you want to come back with another question. So with that, again, I'm going to read aloud 3 questions that we received via chat in the Zoom room on behalf of the participants. So the first one is, William Street is identified to be a significant cycle facility to serve central Oshawa. Will the transit facility west of Ritson Road accommodate this necessary cycle facility, which may require an off-road facility?
So that's a great question. We were asked that by town staff, our city staff as well. So we DRT, who are using that as the layover, are aware of the cycling facility, and so really the buses are stopping there and laying over. So there's not a lot of other activity than the buses sitting in the curb lane. So they are looking at how to get the cycling facility through there. So yes, there are solutions that will work to go around there, and then, as I mentioned, when the GO train is extended further east and there's the new stop down on Ritson Road, that terminal location will disappear because the buses will all be going down there. So we will be working with the city and with Durham Region Transit to make sure that all of these things that we need to do in that area work together.
Thanks, David, and thanks to our participant who put the question forward. So the next question we received was from Trish, and it's, please clarify how long will it take to travel across the BRT line?
Okay, so I'll start end to end, although we know that not many people do that. Today, it takes, I guess it's 140 minutes. So it's just 2 hours and 20 minutes to get from down, or no, sorry, it's, I'm trying to remember the numbers off the top of my head here. I think it's about 100 minutes from end to end, which is an hour and 40 minutes from downtown Oshawa to Scarborough Centre if you were to go along there by transit. With the new service, you would save 10 minutes on the bus, and you would probably save another 10 minutes for reliability. So your 100-minute trip becomes an 80-minute trip. Now, that percentage time savings would be the same if you're only traveling half the route. You would still see about a 15 to 20% reduction in your travel time, which is quite significant moving along the corridor.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Trish, for the question. So I have one more written question to read from one of our Zoom participants, and then we'll get back to Souza for a follow-up question. So the question is, TTC is doing curbside stop, then DRT is doing center. In the overlap, will it make the traffic even worse?
So that's a good question. So there's a balance between providing enough local service and providing enough express service and making room for traffic. So the intention is that the TTC will operate in the median lanes, and all of the buses will operate in the median lanes as far out as Dormington. And then some of the buses will come out to the curb to go north on Nielsen. When we get a little bit further east, some of the TTC buses will come out and turn into the university. As well, a certain number of the buses will operate along the curb to fill in the longer distance space between the stops to provide local service. So there will be some service that runs in the curb lane. Most of the service will stay in the bus lane. When we did the traffic analysis, we found that the mix of the buses and the cars, by having some local buses in the curb and the main DRT and express buses in the mixed lanes, does not have an impact on the local traffic. So we've taken that into account in the design of the corridor.
Perfect, thank you, David. So we're going to go back to Souza because I know that she had a lot that she wanted to kind of touch on. So we're going to go ahead and let her have a follow-up question. Go ahead, Souza.
Like a comment I'm making about, oh, sorry. Good evening. My name is Lisa. I live with Souza. We are sisters. We live right on Ellesmere. So it's more like a comment that I like to make. On Ellesmere, we have 95 bus that will take us all the way down to close to the Scarborough Centre. The Durham people taking the GO train, they have bus number 38 that takes them right into the Scarborough Town Centre, the very grounds of the town centre. And they have the 85 bus that take them all the way right on Shepherd, all the way to Don Mill subway station. So it's just like, I just do not understand your project on that stretch, because we have everything we need, and the Durham people, they have everything they can possibly need, except that I think, I'm going to be mean here, for somebody who's trying to get a big fat bonus and come up with a project that makes no sense to us. I don't know why you're trying to sell that to us. It doesn't make sense. We get no benefit from it. We're not trying to be selfish here. No, not only we get no benefit, it's going to destroy our neighborhood. For what? For the sake of what? I don't get it. And how many times will we have to say, no, it doesn't work for us? Will you guys eventually hear what we say and analyze what we say instead of focusing on your project that has to be implemented regardless of what we think? I think there's a human factor that you cannot neglect here. You need to factor what people in the neighborhood feel, because this is no small thing. This is our houses, our investment. One day, if we're not expropriated, because that's what it looks like it's going to be in the long run, make it commercial so that everybody out of the neighborhood, you want to take ownership of it. So if that's not what your plan is, when we're going to sell our houses, so do you guys factor that in? That one day it may be an investment when we sell it, how fast we can sell it because of all this inconvenience?
Thank you, Lisa. I believe it is. Sorry, Lisa, your name's not coming up here for that. So I'm going to go over to Stephen to start on that one.
Thanks, Jocelyn, and thanks, Susa, and Lisa, sorry. Again, part of this is around listening and looking at the entire trip and the various communities and potential users of the DSBRT. And again, we're listening, and we've heard some people who, have spoken about the need and the want for this kind of project. And again, we hear the concerns from you and, members in the community. So this is why we continue to have these conversations and, take part of these engagement activities to hear and to look at ways to mitigate some of these challenges and concerns. But again, we also want to take into consideration, looking down the road, what's coming at us, what are we seeing in terms of projections, and ensuring that we're taking into consideration, the potential growth within Durham, the potential growth within Scarborough, and some of the businesses and other avenues that are along the corridor. So, again, thank you. We definitely hear the passion, and we are taking into consideration these pieces and these conversations. But again, it's about looking across the entire trip and some of the other communities. Not sure if you, Tanya, wanted to add to that as well.
Well, I just want to add that this is part of the TPAP. It's a public process. So what you're saying right now becomes a part of public record, and this is part of the process. And we listen to what the people are saying to us, and we try to incorporate your comments and also provide the mitigation that Stephen is saying. Also, as part of what Metrolinx is doing, also and overall, like when we all of our government agencies, we're trying to plan for what's upcoming in the future. Eventually, Ellesmere Road will get more and more traffic, more car traffic, and so on. So sometimes one of the things that Metrolinx looks at and other agencies is how we can improve upon that with, for example, this bus rapid transit that's being implemented here. But yeah, I just want to make it known that as part of this process right here, right now, this is a important part that you're a part of right now. So you voicing your opinion, that's helping us in this process.
Thank you very much. So that's kind of the end of the questions and hands up that we've received on the Zoom side of things. Wait, let me just double check. I don't want to miss anybody. No, sorry, I don't think so. Yeah, so that's it for the live questions on our side. Apologies. I'm going to hand it back over to Stephanie for closing remarks now. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And thank you to everyone who took the time to join us for tonight's event. We received a lot of great questions, comments, and feedback on the DSBRT project, and we appreciate the interest and continued input. A reminder that the Public Information Center number 4 will be open on Metrolinx Engage until November 11th, 2021. This evening's live presentation, as well as answers to questions that we weren't able to address, will be posted on Metrolinx Engage. The dedicated community engagement team can be reached via email at dsbrt@metrolinx.com or by submitting a feedback form on Metrolinx Engage. Thank you once again for joining us this evening. Stay safe and have a good night.